Portable bread.
Okay, so we're going to do, we're taking a break from our Talmud. We're going to do a Talmud story today. And I'm going to do a lesson that I've just started developing. I just want to share it with you. And it's kind of a transition to where we're going to go in June, where I'm just going to start a new section of Talmud. I just think we've been doing the tithing a little. We've got the point, I think, now. And I just want, for my last 5 weeks, 5 Wednesdays, I'll start next week, then I want to just do something a little different in the Talmud. We'll still be doing Talmud, but just a different section. And I haven't picked it out yet, so I'll pick it out soon. So this is sort of a transition. It's just some material I've been working on. So a couple of things about the packet. First of all, the copy machine is Israeli, so it copies. At least when I use it, you have to treat it as if it's in Hebrew. so it actually, and the first is just a draft lesson plan, so you can ignore that, the first page. So we're going to just start on where it says telling, listening, learning, a Jewish ethic of storytelling. That's where we're going to start. And I introduced some of this material at a sermon that many of you are at, but have certainly forgotten by now, and because I've forgotten it, so I'm sure you've forgotten it too. But it was a Yizkor sermon on Pesach about trauma stories, and it was a relationship to Passover, which is a storytelling holiday. And it's not just that Passover is a storytelling holiday; we're a storytelling people. We're a storytelling species, and among the species, we're a particularly storytelling people. And I've been playing with the idea that we kind of define our identity in a world where it's very difficult to draw boundaries on identity, for all sorts of reasons, especially in America. And it's not just because of intermarriage and just the mingling of peoples. And so what is it that makes a Jew? Actually, a harder question to answer right now. So one thing, I'm not answering the big question. One thing is that it's the stories that we tell. If you were brought up with Jewish stories, if Jewish stories are sort of in your soul, you look at the world through the lens of Jewish narratives, holiday stories, hero stories, Torah stories, then that's a key marker of Jewish identity. So on Passover, it's actually Susan referred me back to a book I'd read a while ago called The Wounded Storyteller, the author, Arthur Frank, talks about 3 different types of illness stories or trauma stories. So it doesn't just have to be illness, but any kind of difficulty that you have, and you're going through the difficulty and you tell a story about it. That's Passover, right? I mean, Passover is a trauma story because we were slaves. That's the trauma. And then what do we learn from that? So that's the subject of the book. And I want to look, before we look at the Talmud story, I want to just go through the different types of stories, and so that's the sort of text we're going to look at. So again, if you see this telling, listening, learning, a Jewish ethic of storytelling, first I'm going to just quote him where it says 1, the 3 illness stories and the ethics of storytelling. This is a direct quote from the book. And this is about storytelling in general for people that are wounded, gone through some kind of trauma. Which, of course, in the morning minyan is everybody here, but it's every human being, too. Everybody's gone through something. Telling does not come easy. Neither does listening. Seriously ill people are wounded, not just in body, but in voice. They need to become storytellers in order to recover the voices that illness and its treatment often take away. The act of telling is a dual reaffirmation. Relationships with others are reaffirmed, and the self is reaffirmed. Serious illness requires both reaffirmation. So that just tells us in general, telling us a story is a way to recover your voice that's sometimes lost in the course of a trauma, to establish relationships with other people, the relationship between the listener and the story, and just to create a sense that you're human and you're here, that despite whatever you've experienced, you're here to tell the story. So just there's an ethic there, telling the story and listening to the story. We have this really lovely tradition in the Minyan where we tell the story. It could be 30 days, it could be a year, and we're telling each other our own stories, and there's something affirming in that, and we create the community here by telling those stories and by listening to the stories too, and then by learning from the stories together. All right, the 3 types of stories. I'm not going to read each; they're all direct quotes. I'll just explain it because I want to get to the Jewish text. So restitution story. So a restitution story is you went through a trauma. In other words, something was lost, but you regained it. So like I lost my fire in a house. I'm sorry, I lost my fire in a house. I lost my ability to speak, which happened. I lost my house in a fire. I went through a period of homelessness, dealing with the insurance company, dealing with the trauma, my family, but the insurance money kicked in. I got my house back. I'm good as new. If you look at the text here, the idea of good as new. Yesterday I was healthy. Today I'm sick. But tomorrow I'll be healthy again. I mean, sometimes the restitution stories are an ideal. And it's an important narrative. You want to have that in your mind as you go through an illness, as you go through a trauma, the possibility that everything will be resolved, that there'll be a happy ending. So that's the restitution story. There's weaknesses with it because it doesn't always happen. But there's also positive elements in the sense of sometimes it does happen. And also when you go into the illness, you want to think that there could be a resolution to it. Back to normal. I broke my leg, therapy, difficulty, I'm as good as new. You want to have that in the background after you break your leg. All right, another one is the chaos story. So you can look at the quote there, but the chaos story is, well, let me just read a little bit here. Stories are chaotic in their absence of narrative order. The lack of any coherent sequence is an initial reason chaos stories are hard to hear. The teller is not understood as telling a proper story. So that you're so deep in the trauma that you can't even talk about it with any real coherence. There's not any possibility that there'll be a meaning in the story, or even a narrative that we would speak of a beginning, middle, and end. I recognize chaos stories because you hear the word "and" a lot. I'm taking my parents to the ER, and my mom has Alzheimer's, and my dad can't walk, and I have a mammogram, and my children are missing me, and one is in and out of rehab, and you're just lost in the ands. There's and it's just chaos. You're experiencing this chaos, and in telling the story, that's all you've got is just the raw experience. So that's a chaos story. And then you've got the last, which he calls quest. I call the redemptive story. I'm just going to read a little bit here in that paragraph. Quest stories meet suffering head-on. They accept illness and seek to use it. Illness is the occasion of a journey that becomes a quest. What is quested for may never be wholly clear, but the quest is defined by the ill person's belief that something is to be gained through the experience. So with reflection, I've learned in telling the story, often it's telling the story that gets you that insight. Something about me is better. There was a guy in our homeless shelter this winter who lost his wife to an illness, and then went through that period of it's a lower middle class poverty story in America. You're just one illness away from homelessness, so he was that one illness away. Single dad, 4 children, and but he liked to talk about how it made him a better father. It was important in his storytelling that he make that clear to everybody, that there was something to be gained. It's not like you invite the experience at all, on the contrary, but that there's a quest. He found something, and he's able to hold on to that. So the Jewish take here is that, obviously, I've already said, we encourage storytelling. Storytelling is a big part of who we are, not just to assert ourselves as a people, but it's to find our own voice as a people, as a small people, to have that sense of we're here and we're telling our story. But also we privilege. All stories are important. The ability to tell all these stories uninterrupted. One quick side point, all things going to be side points. One quick side point is that we live in a culture very often where stories are interrupted. Because if you're in trauma, you're in woundedness or illness, so you go to a doctor, the doctor doesn't have time to hear your whole story. Doctor's got 5 minutes. So the doctor's going to interrupt as soon as you veer off into something that's not relevant. I'm not blaming the doctor, but there's a sense that I have a story to tell, and it gets very circumscribed by whatever discipline I'm facing. If I'm talking to a social worker, I can't tell the whole story because the social worker doesn't have time. He or she's got other clients. So I can only hear this part right now. And you have a feeling that my story is always being interrupted. So the sense of actually being able to tell the story uninterrupted really brings a sense of voice back to you. But it's hard to do. You have to have, groups, and it has to be part of your own ethic as a community. All right, so we've got those 3 stories. Now, Passover. Remember, it's in Israel, so it's Hebrew. And this is something I talked about in the sermon. I'm not going to go through it. So you can see how in the Haggadah, Passover is our most important holiday. I'm making that claim. If you want to argue back, it's Yom Kippur. But Yom Kippur is also a storytelling holiday, right, where actually it's your own personal story on Yom Kippur. So Passover is, but I'd say Passover is our most important holiday. The ritual is the Haggadah. Well, it's the Seder, but it's the Haggadah, which is telling. And the longest section, which is really long, it's long because you're hungry the whole time, because it's before we eat, is the Magid section, which means storytelling. And so you think that in the Magid you would start with Exodus, the book of Exodus, and the 10 plagues, and they enslaved us, and they tried to kill, and they killed our sons and threw them in the Nile, and Moses is born. Instead, we start with Deuteronomy, 100 years later, where the storytelling is part of this ritual, where you end up at the end of the story. You can look at the text. I'm not going to go through it. You end up at the end of the story redeemed, at the end of a quest. You end up grateful. I'm grateful now because of what I experienced, and I'm generous. So my job is, now that I was a slave, I have to feed the poor, the widow, the orphan. I have to love the stranger because I was a stranger in the land of Egypt. So I come out of this experience redeemed. And in telling the story, it affirms that, reaffirms it. If I don't tell that story that way every Passover, I might forget. The point of the story is I'm now this grateful, generous person. Okay, so what I want to look at is a chaos story from the Talmud. So what I have here, if we have time, we'll look at some more. I mean, maybe you can just glance through there's the Jewish chaos story and Jewish restitution story. What I have is the classic Jewish chaos story, which ironically comes just a few verses before the redemptive story in Pesach, but the Amalek. And I talked about this in the sermon too. So when we're retelling the story of Amalek, it's totally a chaos story. It's, oh my gosh, what did they do to us? Gewalt. We were weak and tired, and they attacked us, and they killed our women and children. And so we have to remember that. No, I mean, we have to forget it. We have to forget to remember to forget. I mean, there's no coherence in the passage, which tells us that it's a chaos story. And also, there's a sense of rage. So therefore, we have to kill them all. It's Haman. It's this eternal enemy. We have to commit genocide on them because you're just in the middle of the rage. So there's a place for chaos stories. And that's how you get Purim, which is a chaos holiday, where you just the groggers and you get drunk, and it's a response to this chaos story. Then you've got Hanukkah, this prayer for Hanukkah. Hanukkah is a classic restitution story for us, because what's the story of Hanukkah? So these evil people came, they polluted our temple. That was bad, but we defeated them and we rebuilt the temple. It's a classic restitution story, right? A bad thing happened, but we were cured. There's no redemptive message in Hanukkah other than let's eat. Let's celebrate. Hanukkah is like that classic Jewish joke where you say they tried to kill us, we defeated them, let's eat. Yes. That's but really it defines Hanukkah. It doesn't define Pesach, which is a more important holiday. Hanukkah and Purim are minor holidays. I mean, they've taken over our imagination, but they're minor holidays. Pesach is a major holiday. Pesach has the redemptive meaning to it. Okay, so there's a place for the chaos story and the restitution story, as there's a place for all stories in Judaism. But it's funny, I can't remember when he said this. When Daniel Hartman was here, he said, if anybody claims Judaism says A, B, and C, you should walk out of the room. So I'm asking you not to walk out of the room, because I'm about to make a broad claim about Judaism. But what I would say is Judaism privileges the redemptive story. We've got room for the chaos story, the restitution story, but Judaism privileges the redemptive story, and you see that because of Pesach. All right. So I want to look at a chaos story, though, and see, well, it's a story that I'm defining as a chaos story. And we'll see what you think and why it's there, and ultimately kind of what's going on. It's a pretty famous story. So do you see where it is? It's Rav Judah said in the name of Rav.
redemption or restitution?
Yeah, here I go. Sorry, it's just yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's the one that looks like it's Talmud. It doesn't look like the Bible. Rav Judah said in the name of Rav. It's at the It's at the top of the last page, and if you're looking at it correctly, which is the Hebrew way of looking. So, if you can't find it, the person next to you probably has it, so you can. I'm going to read. Rav Judah said in the name of Rav. When Moses ascended on high, he found the Holy One, blessed be he, engaged in affixing coronets to the letters. Said Moses, Lord of the universe, what are you doing? He answered, there will arise a man at the end of many generations, Akiva ben Joseph by name, who will expound upon each tittle heaps and heaps of laws. So if you've had the privilege of reading Torah, you know that there's little designs on top of the letters. What are they doing there? What's the order to those designs? Moses asked that of God. A good person to ask. I mean, you could ask God. I shouldn't say person. You might as well ask God. What are those doing there? And he says, I'm not going to tell you, but Akiva knows. He lives far in the future. Many of you have studied the story. Lord of the universe, said Moses, permit me to see him. He replied, turn thee around. Moses went and sat down behind 8 rows and listened to the discourses upon the law. So Moses goes forward in time. It's time travel. Not being able to follow their arguments, he was ill at ease. But when they came to a certain subject, and the disciple said to the master, whence do you know it? The latter replied, it is a law given unto Moses at Sinai, he was comforted. So most times you stop the story there, and all you learn from it is that we can continue to interpret the Torah in creative ways to the point where Moses wouldn't even recognize it now.
Yeah.
Right, that's the point of that. All Moses wanted to know was that it's a direct line to Moses. So usually you stop there, and then we learn about conservative Judaism. It's a classic story about non-Orthodox Judaism. We like to shove this in their faces and say, see, it's this liberal Judaism, or creative and inventive. That's in the Talmud. And then we start arguing, or they walk away, or they don't even listen to me in the first place. But that's usually where we stop the story. But the interesting thing, I'd say the story goes on. Thereupon he returned to the Holy One, blessed be he, and said, Lord of the universe, thou art such a man, and thou givest the Torah by me. He replied, be silent, for such is my decree. So Moses wants to know, how come I get the benefit, the zchut of giving the Torah and not Akiva? And God says, look, there's certain things that God's actually kind of rude there. Just shut up. He says, shut up. It's none of your business. There's some things you can't understand. And okay, so Moses thinks, all right, well some things I don't understand. Now the story suddenly gets very serious. And I want you to imagine the person telling the story now. Because right now it's a cute little story about, Moses goes forward in time. We learn that you're allowed to innovate, which would be important for the rabbis. So now, though, it takes this dark turn, and almost everybody leaves this part of the story out because you don't know what to make of it. That's what we're going. Then said Moses, Lord of the universe, thou hast shown me Torah, show me his reward. Show me that you learned his Torah, show me his reward. So what happens to this guy, Akiva? He's more brilliant than me. He's a better person than me. So he must have been a billionaire, right? He must have run for president. Right? So it says, turn thee around, said he. Moses turned around and saw them weighing out his flesh at the market stall. So Rabbi Akiva, died at the hands of Roman oppression, and they used these steel combs and they actually sold his flesh as horse meat or dog meat. I mean, really, talk about a chaos story. Right, you can't imagine. I just try to picture that. It's Rabbi Akiva, and you're watching. Who's telling the story? It's maybe a student of Rabbi Akiva. Somebody saw that, but it's not over. Lord of the universe, cried Moses, such Torah and such a reward. Like, this is what happens. This is life. This is our existence as a species. So he calls out to God. It can't be. Tell me it's a nightmare. So God says, be silent, for such is my decree. So God says the same thing. He says about the fact that Akiva doesn't give the Torah, Moses does. So it's shut up again. Be silent actually the Hebrew is starker. It's really just shut up. So my claim here is that it's a chaos story. Someone in the Talmud wants to get out this just pure Gewalt. I don't have an English word for it. And but maybe there's more to it. Like, why is the story here? We've got 2 minutes to talk about in the context of my.
So contrary to the covenant. I mean, the covenant is just do what I want, and you will have the land of milk and honey, all these other rewards. And this is so contrary.
Yeah.
Isn't this kind of like what the universal answer for the Holocaust? Why did you do this?
Shut up. Yeah. It's not only. I mean, it's an aggressive answer. Yeah. That's what I think. So I think I don't have a lot of answers for that. I think that's the experience the story evokes, and I think there's value just in being able to evoke that emotion, and not much more. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think it begs for us to make a redemptive story by saying there are things we don't understand about God. We still believe in God and God's goodness, and what we see here is not all. So it makes us think there must be more, which is redemptive.
Moses time travel.
Yeah.
Isn't that God said is such is my decree is that you cannot see the future, and there is over the future a long-term point to in fact Moses' contributions as a key.
Yeah. So that's really good. And what I would say is that with the benefit of actual time as opposed to instant time travel, we have the ability to turn this into a redemptive story. I mean, and now, so it's it's a martyr story. There's things that we can do to honor Rabbi Akiva, the memory of Rabbi Akiva. We can live as righteous Jews. Because he suffered, we can be inspired by his courage, by his great learning. It was not possible this is a story. Somebody told this story. So let's take it away from reality right now. Take it away from the sense of history. And somebody wanted to put together a story. That person wasn't in the frame of mind at that point to find ultimate meaning. Maybe the person was a guy who saw Rabbi Akiva's flesh being sold in the market, and all he could come up with was this Gewalt. But you're right, through the course of time, and I said before, Judaism does privilege the kind of redemptive storytelling, but allows a place for the chaos storytelling. And what's interesting is that the Talmud's got a lot of these stories. So the Talmud, which is really the Bible has many too, but I'm amazed at how many the Talmud has, and now I'm starting to understand why, because there's a place for it. But with what you're saying also clues me into, so then we keep reading it. I mean, what are you supposed to do on Passover? Just keep telling the story. You can even look at this, or you don't have to look, or I can quote it for you, but there's the Avadei Meinu paragraph, where it says that even if you're the wisest man in the world, even if you're the smartest rabbi, you still have to tell the story. And the more you tell the story, the more highly praised you are. But why do you have to keep telling the story? Because maybe you haven't gotten it yet. I mean, if you're bored with the story, it's exactly the place where you could find more meaning, to find more personal redemption for yourself. So tell it again. And also one other thing, and so in the Deuteronomy passage, which starts the Magid, you have my father was a wandering Aramean. That's on verse 5. I can just read it. It's hard to find these things in this weird copy, but so you go through the story. We cried to the law, God, the Egyptians enslaved us, dealt ill with us. Verse 10 you have, and now. To me, that's the most important. Those are the most important two words. That I went through this trauma, and now I'm a better person. Now I'm a better father. And now I'm a more generous person. But it takes some time. So the Akiva stories, we're in the middle of a chaos. So we don't have the time to really find the redemptive meaning in it. But tell the story again. Tell it 100 years later. Tell it 500 years later. So we're we're almost, in some ways, I think, in telling stories of the Shoah, we wanted to jump right through right to the redemptive stories, because we're Jews and we feel like that's where our storytelling should take us. It's probably still too soon. It rings a little false, I think, especially if you're not a survivor, I mean, survivors can, after 70 years, could probably, maybe, but we should also understand maybe not. But 100 years, 200 years, I mean, it's interesting to see how they'll be telling the story in 500 years. And other comments? Yeah, Jane.
It seems to me the Akiva story is exactly what you just described. So maybe the audience for that story were people who actually experienced it,
Yeah.
who have been aware of it.
Yeah.
So you can't quite get that through line.
Yeah.
It seems like whoever fashioned the story was trying to find an end point that would keep them together, that would center them again after such a horrific experience.
Yeah. Just one quick comment. We'll give a little more time, but one quick comment. When there's this interesting story, when Elie Wiesel first submitted the manuscript Night to the publisher, remember that it was originally written in Yiddish, so that was his language, and it was like 800 pages. If you've read Night, it's a short book, right? So, and it was published in Yiddish, and I think in Israel, and then he wrote it in English, and the publisher said, it's too dark. Like you can say the dark stuff, but we need some, because Americans, Americans like redemptive stories, so they're like Jews in that sense too. So he changed it, and he was able to change it, and it was interesting. It was but that wasn't the mood he was in writing the book. He wanted to get across a sense of the chaos. And
detail as well.
Yeah, and he did. I mean, that's the brilliance of the book. Of course, the chaos is in there, but it needed to end with a sense of liberation and redemption. In his original draft, he didn't intend it. And what's interesting is a similar thing happened with the Diary of Anne Frank, which it's really a very dark story. Gosh, I mean, she dies of typhus at the very end. She dies like a day before liberation, and it's just can you imagine? I mean, the horror. And then when Broadway got a hold of it, and Hollywood gets a hold of it, suddenly she's the gift of redemption, to the great lesson that we all learned, and tell her that a couple days before she died, like you're the great gift, so there was actually a TV movie that kind of restored some of that just total chaos to it. It actually showed her in the camps, and showed her dying of typhus, which the diary doesn't show. I mean, the diary ends, in the middle of chaos, but before the worst chaos. So both, is this American tendency to too soon get to the redemption, because you have to get to the chaos before.
Yeah,
all right, sorry. So
you don't quite appreciate the restitution unless you hit chaos as a problem.
And maybe you need time, right? You need time to really process.
There's a message there in terms of the Jew's role in eternity, continuity. Okay.
Yeah.
That you can't be left strictly with the chaos dimension, and the hope is that there is more than what takes place besides just the chaos.
Yeah.
Yet the reality of life in all its dimensions is that there will be chaos.
Right. Yeah.
And you have to get to learn to understand it and absorb it. It isn't all going to be happiness.
Right, exactly. It's a subtle point.
Yeah.
So there's a place for all kinds of storytelling, especially for chaos. However, we want to nudge things. I was talking about the difference between nudge and nudge. Like we want to nudge the storytelling towards redemption. What did you learn? How did you come out of this better? And nudging is like we're nagging a little bit, but we want to nudge. So there's two ethics. The ethic is to listen and to tell your story, however you're experiencing it, but to understand. Look, maybe there's a way you could frame the story that comes out in a redemptive mode at the end. So Rebecca, you were waiting to. Did you want to say something else?
No.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, Mike.
One other way of looking at it is, early in Judaism there was the concept that this is the way you're supposed to live, and if you do, you'll get the right rains and the right seasons, and you'll get this land, and good things will happen. If you do something bad, bad things will happen, and it will go on to your children and their children. But life shows us that bad things happen to good people, and good things happen to bad people.
Yeah. Right.
And I think I look at this as an explanation of this is a bad thing happening to good things, and don't ask me about it.
Don't ask me about it, right? Yeah. Okay.
Isn't the whole Jewish experience a redemptive chaos? I mean, look, you're here.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely. Am Yisrael Chai. I mean, you come out, but But it's a nudge, you nudge it because telling this, because also we're here, but acknowledging the trauma, the pain is also part of, yeah. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.